Thank you, everyone. So I'm Jane Taylor. I'm the chair of the Patient Council for an IMI project called Approach. And Approach is essentially about osteoarthritis. And osteoarthritis is a disease that it's really prevalent. It's not only prevalent, but it's hugely disabling. And by the age of 65, it's estimated that approximately 80% of people globally will have some X-ray evidence of osteoarthritis. So just gives you an indication of how prevalent it is. And I've lived with osteoarthritis since my 40s. I've also lived with rheumatoid arthritis since my 20s. And for me, one of the motivations of getting involved in Approach was that for my rheumatoid arthritis, there's been huge developments. You know, when I was first diagnosed, it was a very, very bleak future. Since then, advances in immunology have meant that there are all kinds of developments that I've been able to access as I've got older. With osteoarthritis, there really has been no development at all. And there is actually no drug that you can give someone with osteoarthritis, however severe, to actually halt the condition or reverse the condition. So that's what really Approach is trying to do. We know that one of the reasons that trials have failed in the past is because it was thought that osteoarthritis was just one disease and that all patients experienced it in the same way. We now know that that's not true, that there are many reasons why people get osteoarthritis, and there are many subtypes of the disease. So the goal of Approach is really to try and identify from a huge database subtypes of osteoarthritis through biomarkers, whether it's X-rays, blood tests, whatever, and with those subtypes be able to devise new clinical guidelines for clinical studies, and also to find markers which will enable clinicians to know who is likely to respond to a particular treatment and who isn't. So it's a really, really useful project which has the potential to move the field on, a field that hasn't really moved on for a number of years. So that was the reason for my involvement. It started in 2015 and it's finished officially in December 2020, but it has had an extension. So we're about to have our final kind of meeting in November together as the consortium. So what was the purpose of the Patient Council that was set up? If I can have the next slide, please. It was really to give, as Jan said, the patient perspective. And I've used this slide before, and I just think it gives you a really good visual image of why it's important to get the user perspective. So there's the parents very happy with how they've set up this mobile, and the poor baby is having to look at the wrong end of these animals. And I think, you know, if only that baby could have spoken or told them. But in a way, that's why it's so important to get patient perspectives, user perspectives in right at the beginning of the study. As part of the Approach project, there is a 2-year clinical protocol. I can have the next slide. And that was really where the Patient Council were going to be of the most practical use, because we can tell people what patients want, what patients need. So we were very involved working with the clinicians to devise the protocol. It was happening in 5 centres in 4 different countries. And it put quite a burden on the patient. They had to come every 6 months over 2 years. They had to have a lot of tests, blood tests, X-rays and so on, gait analysis, all kinds of markers. So we advised on this. So what did we do? Well, we made quite significant changes that I think improved the overall impact. So an example of that would be people were going to have fast who had to come quite a distance, and for them the actual appointments were going to be later in the day. So we managed to convince the team, who were initially a little bit reluctant, that it would be better to just go there to some of these people in the mornings, early mornings, and take the blood in their homes. And initially it was thought, well, we can't do that because, you know, there's all these scientific protocols. But together with the scientists, the researchers, and the patients in the room, we came to convince them that this would be a much better way to do it. So that's an example of something, you know, that we did that we think made an impact. If you can just click again. So communication, we did a lot of communication because it's really important that you communicate with patients in a clinical trial. So we looked at the patient information leaflets, we reviewed them, we made changes to all the information that they got. We also had a newsletter. We set up a newsletter group. There was one permanent patient member on that, Shauka, who was a great communicator, and there was one rotating member of the patient council, 3 researchers and the manager from the project management team. And we sent that to patients involved every 6 months, I think it was, and it just kept them informed. And we tried to make it very, very patient-centric and to think about it from their point of view. And of course, people on the team, I'm from the UK, so I wasn't much use here, but we had someone from Norway, 2 people from the Netherlands, so they were also able to translate and to get it in a really good colloquial patient language. If I can have the next click, please. Thank you. And one other thing that we did that I think had an impact was there was a lot of X-rays and tests which the patients could get results from, they could get to see. So there was a lot of discussion about the kind of questions that we would ask and how the researchers, the clinicians could answer these questions ethically and in the best and most supportive way. So we did a lot of work around that. And next click, please. Thank you. Evaluation. We thought it was really important that we get evaluation early on about the clinical site visits. So we devised a questionnaire which went out to patients, but also patients from the actual 2 of the sites in Norway and in the Netherlands actually went out and, with permission, sort of shadowed someone at each stage so that they could get immediate feedback and improve things for future visits. Just practical things like, you know, tea and coffee, how long they had to wait, how easy it was for them, and so on. And I think that was really, really useful. Next slide, please. So all that improved the science and improved the retention. And they're the kind of what I suppose Jan might call not the low-hanging fruit, they're really useful, but some of the things that I feel were most impactful were the things that are perhaps a little bit more difficult to quantify and to measure. So one of the things I think that really happened during Approach, and we were really successful at, was just changing the conversations. Every year we had a 2-day meeting that we went to, and all of us interacted. We didn't sort of sit apart. We went to every session. We had our own presentations that we gave to everyone about what we were doing, or about pain, for example, and what it was like to live with pain and problems with the measurement of pain, all kinds of things. And gradually we found that more and more people were talking differently in the room. One of the things that was arranged for us was sort of glossaries, if you like, of the talks that, you know, the machine learning people were doing, so that we could follow. But of course that was really useful for all the other researchers in the room. So people started, I think, to open up a bit more and to share ideas. And we've felt very, very much integrated into the project. So I think it's about that connection that you don't get if you're sitting, as Jan said, on perhaps a group. You can be very useful, but if you're not actually there talking to people and saying, well, hang on a minute, explain this to me, or why do you have to do it that way? You don't get that same sort of mutual co-production It can also be very empowering for the patient. I mean, you know, if you have chronic illness, there's an awful lot of losses in your life. There's very little that is positive about it. And if you can actually share your experiences and make research better for everyone and make the outcomes better, then that's very empowering for you as someone living with chronic illness. And I think also it's about giving the holistic picture of what it's like to be a patient living with a chronic illness. Many researchers, particularly if they're lab-based or data-based, don't get a chance to meet the whole person, to speak to the whole person, and to recognise, you know, what's important to them, what matters to them. So I think it's a really important thing to have patients and to see it as normal. Next slide, please. So this is an example of that. Here are two images. The first one is an image of the typical osteoarthritis patient with 3 different types of knee osteoarthritis. And this was Harry, who was one of the PIs of the project. This is how he used to teach his students, he said, and show them a typical osteoarthritis patient. And he shared with
Jane, you have less than 1 minute.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'll hurry up.
Okay.
Harry shared with us that this was how he now showed his students, patients with osteoarthritis. He now looked at us as people rather than just pieces of, you know, joint or bone. So I think that is one of the most important things, that you start to get researchers to look upwards and outwards rather than downwards, and to see the whole picture. And I'm just going to finish with a final slide, which is a quote from Jonathan Larkin, who was also one of the coordinators of the project. And it's a very nice quote, but I like particularly what he says about our contributions. He said they had both a disruptive and a stabilizing effect. And I think that's really important. I think it's a nice note to end on. I think that all patient involvement should be both disruptive and stabilizing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you. I think your insights with this project are very, very useful and interesting, and I think we should be discussing later on more about this.